In 1938, a man wrote a sentence that should disturb you more than it does. He claimed that 98 out of every 100 people live as drifters, not failures, not lazy people. Drifters, people who never truly decide where they're going, who let the current of ordinary days carry them somewhere they never chose. He didn't have a study, he had an intuition. His name was Napoleon Hill, and he wrote it as a warning, not as data. But here's what should unsettle you. Nearly a century later, psychology gave that intuition a name, measured it, and found it living quietly inside millions of lives that look completely fine from the outside. This isn't a video about laziness. It's about a force that doesn't push you toward disaster. It pulls you away from the life you were capable of living. And the most uncomfortable part isn't that this force exists. It's that, at some point, you invited it in. You'll see exactly when. And you won't be able to unsee it. So what is this force exactly? Here's the first uncomfortable truth. It isn't something that happens to you. It's the absence of something you stop doing. Drift isn't a decision. It's what quietly fills the space where a decision used to be. To understand it, you have to go back even further than 1938 to 1890 and to a man named William James, the father of American psychology. James spent years studying something most people never stop to think about: habit. And what he found is the engine running underneath everything Hill only sensed from a distance. James wrote that habit is the enormous flywheel of society, the force that keeps the fisherman at sea through the winter, the miner in the dark, the clerk at the same desk for 40 years. A flywheel, once it's spinning, doesn't need a reason to keep going. It just keeps going, on momentum alone. And here's the part that should land somewhere in your chest. Most of your life is already running on that momentum. Not on choices. On grooves cut so long ago you've forgotten you were the one who cut them. James went further and put a number on it that still unsettles psychologists today. He estimated that the overwhelming majority of everything we do in a day, he said as much as 99 hundredths of it, is purely automatic and habitual. Think about what that actually means. The route you drive without seeing it. The first thing your hand reaches for when you wake. The way you answer, "I'm fine," before the question fully lands. Almost none of your day is being chosen in the moment. Almost all of it is being played back from a recording you made years ago and never reviewed. Then James wrote a line that's been quietly haunting people for over a century. He said that if the young could only realize how quickly they'll become, and these are his words, mere walking bundles of habits, they'd pay far more attention to who they're turning into while they're still soft enough to change. Walking bundles of habits. Sit with that for a second. Not a person weighing decisions, a bundle. A collection of automatic responses wearing your name and answering to it. He had a reason for the urgency. James described the young nervous system as plastic, soft, like warm wax, and he warned that it doesn't stay that way. It sets. The patterns you run in your 20s and 30s press themselves into you and harden like plaster around a mold. This is what drift actually is. It isn't laziness, and it isn't failure. It's the slow handover of your life, from the part of you that chooses to the part of you that just repeats. Every morning you don't decide, the flywheel decides for you. Every evening you spend exactly the way you spent the last one. The groove gets a little deeper, a little harder to climb out of. And the cruelest detail in his whole discovery is the timing of it. By the time you notice you've been drifting, the wax has already cooled. The version of you that could have changed without much effort is already gone, and the version left behind mistakes the hardening for personality. You start saying things like, "That's just how I am," when what you really mean is, "That's just what I've repeated." But James didn't stop at describing it. He wrote something that turns this from a quiet observation into something closer to a sentence handed down. He said, "We are spinning our own fates, and never to be undone." Never to be undone. Every small thing you do, or quietly fail to do, leaves a mark that doesn't wash back out. Nothing you do is ever, in his words, truly wiped out. The body remembers. The grooves stay exactly where you carved them. There's one more thing James said about habit, and it's the part that turns this whole idea against you. He believed habit was supposed to be a gift. The reason we automate the small things, tying a shoe, driving a route, making coffee, is so the mind is freed up for higher work. The more of daily life we can hand to automatic custody, he wrote, the more our higher powers are set free for their own proper work. That was the promise. Habit takes the small things off your plate so you can finally do the big ones. But here's where drift performs its quietest theft. It lets the automation take over and then sets your higher powers free for nothing. The attention that was supposed to go to the life you wanted gets handed to a screen, a feed, a loop of small comforts that ask nothing of you and return nothing to you. You're not even idle. You're busy. You just stopped aiming. And that is the exact moment the invisible force walks in, because you held the door. You didn't sign anything. You simply repeated yesterday and called it a normal day, and let the part of you that used to want more go quiet. So when Hill said 98 out of 100 people drift, this is the mechanism he couldn't name but somehow felt in the room. People don't drift because they're weak. They drift because the flywheel is real, the momentum is invisible, and no one ever warns them that the soft years are running out. You didn't choose to drift. That's the whole problem. Nobody chooses it. It's what moves in the moment choosing stops, and if you're honest with yourself, it's been moving in you for longer than you'd like to say out loud. So let me ask you the first question. And I want you to actually answer it, not nod and move on, the way drift trains you to. Here it is. When was the last time you felt like you were moving towards something, instead of just keeping something running? Take your time with it, because if you had to reach back further than you expected, past this year, maybe past several, then you already know something is off, even if you can't name it. And for a long time, psychology couldn't name it either. We had a word for the people who fall apart. We had no word for the people who quietly stop showing up to their own lives while everything still technically works. Then a sociologist named Corey Keyes gave it one. The word is languishing. Keyes spent his career studying something the field had almost entirely ignored. For 100 years, mental health research asked one question: how sick are you? Depression, anxiety, disorder. The whole map was built around what's wrong. Keyes asked a different question. He asked, even when nothing is wrong, are you actually well? And what he found is that those are not the same question. The absence of illness is not the presence of life. He laid it out as a spectrum. At one end, flourishing, people who feel engaged, who feel their life has direction and meaning, who wake up with something pulling them forward. At the other end, languishing, and this is the part that should make you sit up. Languishing isn't depression. People who languish aren't necessarily sad. They're not crying, they're not in crisis, they're not falling apart. They go to work, they answer texts, they look, from the outside and often from the inside, completely fine. They're just empty, running, but not arriving. Present, but not there. He's called it the void between depression and flourishing. And here's the detail that ties his research straight back to a man writing about drifters in 1938. When Keyes measured whole populations, he found that the people who were truly flourishing, fully alive, fully engaged, were a minority. Barely 2 in 10 adults. The overwhelming majority were either languishing outright or sitting in a flat, moderate middle, neither sick nor well, just maintaining. Hill said 98 out of 100 drift. Keyes, with data instead of intuition, found that the vast majority of people are not flourishing. 2 different centuries, 2 different methods, almost the same number. Now here's why this matters more than it sounds and why languishing is so dangerous precisely because it's so quiet. People assume a flat, fine, empty life is at least stable. It isn't. Keyes found that languishing is not a safe middle resting place, it's a slope. People who languish are at sharply higher risk of sliding into full depression later. The emptiness isn't the bottom. It's the on-ramp. The very ordinariness of it, no villain, no breakdown, no obvious cause, is what lets it sit in your life for years without ever triggering the alarm that would make you act. And that is exactly what drift feels like from the inside. This is the whole reason the force stays invisible. It doesn't arrive as pain. Pain you'd notice. Pain you'd treat. Drift arrives as a low, flat hum. A Sunday that feels like every other Sunday. A year that's hard to tell apart from the last one. A quiet voice that used to want things and has slowly gone silent. There's no crisis to point to. Your job is fine. Your relationships are fine. On paper, you have nothing to complain about, and that becomes its own kind of trap, because how do you fight something when you can't even say what's wrong? That's the cruelty of the good on paper life. There's no enemy at the door. No single thing to blame, to leave, to fix. Just a slow, accumulating sense that you're further from alive than you used to be, and no clear moment where it happened. Keyes gave that feeling a name and a risk profile. He proved it's real, he proved it's measurable, and he proved it's common, far more common than the conditions we actually talk about. And it doesn't just sit there harmlessly while you wait for it to pass. Keyes measured what languishing actually costs, and the numbers are not gentle. People in this state lose more workdays, their focus dulls, their productivity drops. Tasks that should take an hour stretch across an afternoon, not because the work got harder, but because the part of you that supplies drive has quietly powered down. Languishing isn't just feeling flat, it measurably erodes your capacity to function, in ways that look a lot like a milder, longer-lasting version of the impairment we only take seriously when it has a clinical label. But here's the part that closes the trap. The condition attacks the exact resource you'd need to escape it. To climb out of a flat, drained life, you need motivation, energy, the will to start something new, and stay with it. Languishing is, by definition, the depletion of all three. So you end up needing the most from the faculty that's been hollowed out the most. That's why people stay in it for years. It's not that they don't see the emptiness, it's that the emptiness has eaten the very fuel they'd used to leave. So if that first question landed harder than you wanted it to, if you had to reach too far back for the last time you felt genuinely pulled forward, you're not broken, and you're not alone. You're describing the most ordinary condition there is. The one almost nobody names, because naming it would mean admitting how long it's been going on. And the next question is the one that really hurts. If it's this empty, this flat, this clearly not the life you meant to be living, why haven't you left it? Why haven't you left it? Hold on to that question, because the answer is going to feel personal, and it isn't. It's one of the most predictable mistakes the human mind makes, so reliable that researchers can produce it in a lab, on demand, in almost anyone. In 1985, two psychologists named Hal Arks and Catherine Bloomer ran a study that should be taught to every adult alive. They sold theater season tickets, and at the point of sale, they randomly gave some buyers a discount. Same seats, same plays, same everything. The only difference was how much each person had paid. Then they watched who actually showed up. The people who'd paid full price attended far more plays than the people who got the discount. Not because they enjoyed theater more. For one reason only, they'd spent more, and they couldn't stand to see that money go to waste. Think about what that means. People dragged themselves out on cold nights to sit through plays they didn't even want to see, not for any future reward, but to honor money that was already gone. Arks and Bloomer named this the sunk cost effect. The deeper the investment you've already made, the harder it becomes to walk away, even when walking away is clearly the better move. They had another version that lands even harder. Imagine you've accidentally booked 2 ski trips for the same weekend. One cost $100, one cost $50. You know, you can feel it, that the $50 trip would actually be more fun. Which do you choose? Most people pick the $100 trip. They choose the worst weekend on purpose, because more money is on the line. They'd rather have a worse time than feel like they wasted more. Read that back. People will choose to enjoy their own life less, just to protect a number that no longer exists. Now point that at your own life, and you'll see why you haven't left. You're not staying because the life is good. You're staying because of what you've already put in. The years at the job, the decade in the routine, the version of yourself you built and announced to everyone. All of that money is already spent, non-refundable, gone, and yet every single day you let it vote on your future, the way a full-price ticket holder lets a receipt drag him out into the cold. You're not protecting your life. You're protecting the receipt. And sunk cost is only half of it. In 1988, 2 economists, William Samuelson and Richard Zeckhauser, demonstrated something they called status quo bias, the human tendency to prefer whatever already is, simply because it already is. In experiment after experiment, when one option was labeled the current one, the default, people chose it far more often than the exact same option presented as a new choice. The default didn't have to be better, it just had to be the default. We are wired to keep the lights where they are. Stack those two together and you start to see the architecture of the cage. Staying requires no decision. Leaving requires a hard one. Staying costs no energy today. Leaving costs a frightening amount right now up front. So the deck is quietly stacked every single morning towards same as yesterday. Not because same as yesterday is winning. Because it never has to compete. Underneath both of these sits the deepest gear of all, mapped by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, loss aversion. They showed that losses hurt us roughly twice as much as equivalent gains feel good. Losing $100 stings about twice as hard as finding $100 pleases. And here's why that quietly destroys lives. When you imagine leaving the drifted life, the losses are vivid and certain. The steady paycheck, the familiar faces, the comfort of knowing exactly how tomorrow goes. The gains are just a maybe, blurry, and far away. So your brain runs the math with a rigged calculator that doubles every loss and discounts every possibility. And it concludes, every time, that staying is safer. It feels like wisdom. It's arithmetic with a broken thumb on the scale. And then there's the cruelest mechanism of all, named by a researcher named Barry Staw, who studied why people don't just stay in failing situations, they pour more in. He called it escalation of commitment and described it with a phrase that fits a drifted life perfectly, being knee-deep in the big muddy. The further into the swamp you've walked, the more turning back feels like admitting the whole walk was a mistake. So instead of turning around, you push deeper, because deeper at least honors the steps already taken. Another year in the job you've outgrown. Another decade of the routine that's hollowing you out. Each year you stay becomes one more reason you can't afford to leave, which means the trap doesn't just hold you, it tightens on a schedule. So when I told you that you invited this force in and keep the door open for it, this is what I meant, mechanically. The force isn't holding you in place. Your own accounting is. Every day you don't leave, you quietly re-sign the lease, not because you decided to stay, but because leaving would mean facing a loss your brain has already doubled, abandoning an investment your mind refuses to write off, and stepping off a default it was built to defend. You're not weak. You're running exactly the program you were given. The problem is that the program was never designed to get you a good life. It was designed to keep you from feeling like you lost one. And those are very, very different things. So you're running a program built to protect you from loss, but every program has a core belief buried at the center of it, and the one at the center of yours is the most damaging idea a human being can hold, that trying won't change anything. Here's the part almost nobody understands. You weren't born believing that. You were taught it. Slowly, quietly, one disappointment at a time, and you were the only student in the room. Which brings me to the second question, and like the first, I want a real answer, not a reflex. When did you stop trying for the thing you actually wanted and start just managing the disappointment instead? For most people, there's no single moment. That's the whole problem. It happened by erosion. And to understand how erosion can rewrite what a person believes is even possible, you have to go back to 1967 to a young researcher named Martin Seligman and his colleague Stephen Mayer. Their experiment is hard to hear about, so I'll keep it brief and tell you only what you need. They studied two groups facing the same unpleasant jolts. One group could do something about it. A simple action made it stop. The other group got the exact same jolts, the same amount, the same timing, but nothing they did changed a thing. The discomfort came and went on its own schedule, completely outside their control. Same pain for both groups. The only difference was whether their actions mattered. Then came the part that changed psychology forever. Both groups were put in a new situation, one where escape was now easy, obvious, fully within reach. The first group, the ones who'd learned their actions counted, got out immediately. But the second group, the ones who'd learned that nothing they did made a difference, didn't even try. They just endured it. The door was open. Relief was one small move away. And they lay there and took it, because somewhere along the line they had learned a single devastating lesson. There's no point. Seligman called it learned helplessness. Sit with what that actually means, because it's the key to your whole situation. It wasn't the pain that disabled them. It was the lesson the pain taught, that effort and outcome had come unlinked. And once that lesson was learned, it didn't stay in the box where it started. It spread. It walked with them into a brand new room and shut a door that was standing wide open. They'd stopped checking whether they had power, because they'd already concluded, permanently, that they didn't. Seligman spent the rest of his career showing that human beings work the very same way. This became one of the most influential models in all of psychology for understanding why people sink into passivity and hopelessness, why someone surrounded by open doors will swear, completely sincerely, that they're trapped. They're not lying. They genuinely can't see the exits anymore because they stopped looking a long time ago. Now bring that home, because a drifted life is a learned helplessness training program running in slow motion over years. Think about the trials you've already been through, the resolutions that died by February, the plan that fell apart, the "this time will be different" that turned out exactly like last time. The dream you said out loud once and watched go nowhere. Each of those was a jolt with no escape, as far as your nervous system could tell. And across enough of them, you didn't draw the narrow conclusion that particular attempt didn't work. You drew the wide one, the lethal one. You concluded I can't. And the day you concluded that, you stopped jumping the barrier long before anyone checked whether the barrier was even still there. Which leads to the third question, and this is the one that tends to go quiet in a room. If I told you that 10 years from now, nothing has changed, same routine, same flatness, same distance from the life you meant to live, would any part of you actually be surprised? Be honest. Because if the answer is no, if some part of you just nodded, that nod is the helplessness talking. That's not realism. That's not maturity. That's a learned conclusion, installed by repetition, that your future is just your present stretched longer. And here's the most insidious thing about it. Learned helplessness doesn't feel like despair. If it felt like despair, you'd fight it. It feels like wisdom. It feels like finally being honest with yourself, like lowering your expectations to a sensible level, like accepting reality. You don't experience the cage as a cage. You experience it as having grown up. That's why it holds so well. A trap you can see, you struggle against. A trap that wears the mask of maturity, you defend. So now you know the full machine, the flywheel of habit that runs your days, the emptiness of languishing that drains them, the sunk costs, and the stacked defaults that keep you from leaving. And underneath all of it, the quiet, learned belief that none of it can change anyway. Which means you might already be reaching for the one thought that feels like a way out. You might be thinking, all right, at least now I'm aware of it, and awareness is the first step. Hold that thought for just a moment. Because that comforting idea, the one bringing you relief right now, is about to turn out to be the most sophisticated trap of all. At least now I'm aware of it. Awareness is the first step. If that thought brought you even a flicker of relief in the last few minutes, I need you to watch it closely, because that flicker is the trap closing. That sense of relief is not progress. It's the exact mechanism that's going to keep you exactly where you are, and it's the most sophisticated version of the whole problem. Let me say the thing plainly, because you've earned the bluntness by making it this far. Self-awareness without structural change is just a more sophisticated form of drifting. That's it. That's the blade. You can understand every word of this video. You can name your flywheel and your sunk costs and your learned helplessness with perfect fluency. And if you change nothing about the actual architecture of your days, you have not escaped the drift. You've just learned to narrate it more intelligently while it continues. And here's the part that should genuinely alarm you. The insight isn't neutral. It isn't a harmless first step you can collect now and cash in later. William James saw this more than a century ago, and he said it with a sharpness that still stings. He warned that when a resolve or a strong feeling is allowed to evaporate without producing a single concrete action, it's worse than a chance lost. Worse. Not just a missed opportunity, an active injury. Because every time you feel the surge of insight and don't act on it, you are training your brain to treat feeling as a substitute for doing. You're wearing a groove that connects realization directly to nothing. You're getting better and better at the emotional experience of almost changing. That's why people can watch 100 videos like this one and stay identical. Each video delivers the hit, the recognition, the chill of being seen, the rush of finally understanding, and then the feeling evaporates, and the architecture of their life is untouched, and they're a little number to the next insight, because the last one led nowhere. James understood that the dreamer drowning in sensibility who never does one concrete thing isn't admirable. He's stuck, and the stuckness is dressed up as depth. If that sounds too philosophical, the data is brutally specific. In 2006, two researchers, Webb and Sheeran, gathered together a large body of experiments and asked a simple question. When you successfully change what people intend to do, when you genuinely shift their motivation, their awareness, their resolve, how much does their actual behavior change as a result? The answer should be printed on the wall of every person trying to fix their life. A large shift in intention produced only a small shift in behavior. Let that land. You can move someone's mind a great deal, and their life barely moves at all. Insight is a real thing. It's just a shockingly weak lever for action. The gap between knowing and doing isn't a small crack you can step over with enough motivation. It's a canyon. The psychologist Timothy Wilson spent decades on the other half of this, and reached a conclusion that humbles everyone who hears it. We are, in his phrase, strangers to ourselves. So much of what actually drives us runs below the level we can introspect on, which means the project of thinking your way to change, analyzing yourself harder, understanding yourself more completely, is built on sand. Wilson's research points the other direction entirely. You don't think yourself into a new way of acting. You act yourself into a new way of being. The behavior comes first, and the new self-understanding follows it, not the reverse, no matter how badly the reverse flatters our love of being clever. So here is the cruelest tier of the whole thing, and you should check yourself against it honestly. The most trapped person isn't the numb one who feels nothing, it's the articulate one. The one who's read the books, knows the studies, can give the TED Talk on their own dysfunction, and has quietly started using that fluency as the substitute for the change. They've upgraded from drifting in silence to drifting with footnotes. Same river, same current, same destination. Just a far more impressive narration on the way down. And because understanding feels so much like progress, this person can stall for decades, mistaking the quality of their self-analysis for movement, getting more insightful and no freer year after year. Notice what awareness has actually done here. It hasn't opened the door, it's become the new, more comfortable room. The discomfort of seeing the trap gets resolved, not by escaping it, but by the small relief of having understood it. At least I get it now. Closes the gap just enough that you don't have to do anything. Awareness becomes the off-ramp from action instead of the on-ramp to it. That is the final, most elegant disguise the Force ever wears. It stops hiding from your attention and starts hiding inside it. Which means the way out was never going to be more understanding. You already have enough. More insight at this point is just a more refined way to stand still. The thing that actually breaks the drift is the one thing it can't survive, and it has almost nothing to do with how you think or how you feel. It has to do with what you build around yourself, the structure that makes the right action the path of least resistance, whether you're motivated that day or not. That's where this turns. Because there is a way out, it's just not the one your clever mind keeps reaching for. So if the answer isn't more understanding, what is it? It's this, and it's almost insultingly simple to say and genuinely hard to do. You beat a system with a system, never with a mood. The drift is structural. It runs on habit, on defaults, on environment, on gravity. And you do not defeat a structural force with an emotional one. You don't outfeel it, outwant it, or outresolve it. You outbuild it. You change the architecture, and you let the architecture do the work your willpower was never able to do. Start with the willpower myth, because it's the thing keeping most people stuck in the fight. Roy Baumeister spent years studying self-control, and the popular takeaway got the lesson exactly backwards. People walked away thinking the answer was more willpower, grit your teeth, want it harder, summon more discipline on demand. But when researchers actually looked at the people with the best self-control, they found something that should change how you see this entirely. Those people weren't winning the daily battle against temptation. They were the ones who'd arranged their lives so the battle rarely happened at all. They didn't have more willpower. They needed less of it. They'd removed the fight instead of trying to win it every single day. Read that again, because it quietly dismantles the plan you've probably been running your whole life. You've been waiting to become the version of yourself who finally wants it badly enough. Who has the motivation, the drive, the discipline to push through? I need to tell you, as gently as this can be told, that person is not coming. Motivation is weather. It shows up some days and not others, and you cannot build a life on weather. The people who change don't become permanently motivated. They build structures that work on the days motivation doesn't show. Then there's the deeper finding from a psychologist named Wendy Wood, who studied habit for decades. What she found is that a huge share of what you do every day, close to half of it, isn't decided in the moment at all. It's triggered automatically by your context. The same cues, the same rooms, the same times of day, pulling the same behaviors out of you like a hand reaching for a light switch in the dark. This sounds like a prison, and in block 2 it was one. But turn it over and it becomes the most powerful tool you have. Because if your behavior is downstream of your environment, then you don't have to fix yourself. You have to fix the room. Change the cue, and the automatic response changes with it. No motivation required, because motivation was never running that circuit in the first place. Now take the trap from block 4, the status quo bias, the way the default option always wins, and turn it into a weapon. The default beats you every time because it requires no decision. So stop fighting the default. Move it. Make the thing you want to do the path of least resistance, and make the thing that's draining you the path that takes effort. Researchers have shown this at a scale that's almost hard to believe. When you change nothing about people except the default choice they start with, behavior shifts dramatically: enrollment, participation, whole life outcomes. Not because anyone got more motivated, but because the lazy gravity that always wins was quietly pointed in a better direction. That same gravity that kept you drifting is completely neutral. It will pull you toward a built life exactly as faithfully as it pulled you toward an empty one. You just have to move where it points. This is what structural change actually looks like on the ground, and notice how little it asks of your feelings. It's making the wrong thing 20 seconds harder to reach and the right thing 20 seconds easier, because across a year, that 20 seconds decides thousands of moments while you're not even paying attention. It's not the room you can change for an inspired afternoon. It's the room that quietly makes tomorrow's version of you act right, on the gray days, when you're tired, when the insight has long since evaporated. You're not trying to win Tuesday, you're trying to design a life where you don't have to keep winning it by force. And here, the oldest voice in this whole story already told us how. William James, back in 1890, didn't end on description. He gave instructions, and they hold up against everything we've learned since. Launch the new pattern with the strongest, most decisive initiative you can. Not a quiet intention, a loud one, with stakes and commitment built in. Then, while it's still fragile, allow no exception, not one, because a single slip early on undoes more than the practice you've banked, and seize the very first opportunity to act immediately before the feeling cools, because, as he warned us, a resolution that never becomes an action doesn't just fail, it leaves you worse than before. Strong start. No early exceptions. Strong start. 130 years old, and it's still the blueprint. So here is where the whole thing turns over. The force you invited in was never going to be argued with, understood into submission, or outwilled on a good day. It gets dismantled the way it was built, one structural piece at a time, by changing what surrounds you until the right life becomes the easy one. And the reason this works, the reason it's different from every motivational promise that's failed you before, is the exact reason it doesn't feel inspiring. It doesn't depend on the motivation you don't have. It survives the bad day. It survives the flat week. It works while you're tired and uninspired and completely unsure, which, if you're honest, is most of the time, and is the only condition under which a real solution has to function. You were never lazy. You were never broken. You were a fully capable person running an environment built for drift. Change the environment, and the same capability that maintained the drift for all these years will build the way out of it. So let me take away the last comfortable thing, because you've come too far to keep it. For years, you've had explanations. The timing was wrong. The responsibilities were too heavy. You were tired. You were busy. You were waiting for the right moment, the energy, the sign. And some of that was even true. But here's what you have to face now, after everything we've walked through. An explanation was never the same thing as an exit. You can have a perfect, airtight, deeply sympathetic account of exactly why you drifted and still have drifted. So here it is, the sentence with no cushion under it. You were there. On every one of those ordinary days, you were there. You were capable of choosing, and you drifted instead. Not because you were incapable. That's the part that has to land. Every quiet morning that turned into a quiet year, you were a fully functioning adult with the power to do one thing differently, and the day didn't announce itself as a fork in the road, so you didn't treat it like one. The drift never feels like a decision. That's its entire disguise. But 1,000 non-decisions are a decision. Choosing not to choose is still choosing. You weren't carried off in your sleep. You were awake for all of it, and the not acting was an act, repeated until it became a life. Picture one of them. An ordinary Tuesday, years ago. You woke up, and somewhere underneath the routine there was a quiet flicker. A thing you'd meant to start, a call you'd meant to make, a direction you'd meant to turn. And the day offered you its usual deal. Do the familiar thing, the easy thing, the same thing, and we'll call it a normal day and never mention the flicker again. You took the deal. Not dramatically. You probably don't even remember that specific Tuesday. And that's the point. It was so small, so unremarkable, so easy to take, that it never registered as a choice at all. Multiply that Tuesday by a few thousand, and you don't get a tragedy. You get a life that quietly went somewhere you never picked. I'm not saying that to wound you. I'm saying it because of what it means about right now. If you were capable of choosing on all those days you let pass, then you are capable of choosing in this one. This exact minute, the one you're in as this video ends, is not different in kind from any of those mornings. It's another fork that doesn't look like a fork. The only thing that's different is that, for once, you can see it clearly, and you've just spent half an hour learning precisely how the trap works and precisely how it comes apart. Now I'm going to tell you the truth about what happens next, because you've earned honesty over comfort. Most people who reach the end of a video like this feel the chill, feel seen, feel that clean rush of finally understanding, and then they close the app, and the feeling evaporates, and nothing in the architecture of their life changes by 1 inch. We covered why in Block 6. The insight becomes one more thing that almost moved you, and if that's all this becomes, it doesn't just fail to help. It leaves you slightly worse, slightly more numb, slightly more convinced that nothing lands. That is the default outcome. That is the current, still pulling, even now. So beat it the only way it can be beaten, structurally, immediately, while the resolve is still warm, exactly as James told us. Not with a grand plan. With one move. One change to the architecture around you, small enough that you can do it in the next hour, and real enough that it makes tomorrow's version of you act differently without needing to feel inspired. Move one default. Add friction to one thing that drains you. Remove friction from one thing that builds you. Just one, today, before the feeling cools. And here is where I'm going to ask something of you, not for me, but because it's the first structural move available to you right now. In the comments, name the one change. Say it out loud, in writing, where it's witnessed. That isn't a formality. It's the strong, decisive, public initiative James said a new pattern needs to survive. A resolution kept private evaporates. A resolution placed in front of other people grows stakes, and stakes are structure. So name it specifically, not, I'll do better, but the one concrete thing you're moving in the next hour. If this video names something real in you, subscribe, because this is what we do here. We take the forces that run your life in the dark and drag them into the light, where you can finally work on them. And if someone you love is living one of those good-on-paper lives, looking completely fine while quietly going further away from themselves, send this to them. They won't ask for it. People in the drift never do. That's exactly why it has to come from you. And then, one last time, go back to the number we started with, 98 out of 100. Hill meant it as a warning, and for almost a century people have heard it as a prophecy, as if the math were already settled, as if you'd been counted and filed. But it was never a prophecy. It was only ever a description of what happens to people in the absence of choosing. It describes the room you walk into when you stop building. Which means you cannot be argued out of the 98, and you cannot feel your way out, and you certainly cannot understand your way out. You can only build your way into the 2. The current is still running. It always will be. The only question that was ever really yours is whether, starting in the next hour, you give it something to push against. You were there for all the days you drifted. You're here for this one. Choose like it counts, because it does, and it's the only one that's still open.